Have you ever looked into the eyes of a doll and felt like something was looking back? Not just a reflection of porcelain or plastic, but something older, colder, hungrier. It's that moment when the innocent toy seems to shift just slightly in your peripheral vision. A shadow deepens in its painted smile, a flicker of knowing. What if that feeling isn't just your imagination? What if it's a shared whisper, an ancient instinct, telling you that some things are not meant to be played with? Tonight, we're going to talk about the dolls, not just the famous ones, but the quiet ones, the ones in dusty attics and forgotten corners. And by the end, you might just understand why their stories all sound so eerily, unsettlingly similar. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a warning. A deep dive into the primal fear stitched into the fabric of our oldest legends. We'll journey through one particular night, one specific turning point, and the slow, creeping dread that followed. You'll hear about the worst moment, what it cost, and the chilling silence that lingered long after. Consider this a late-night lesson, a hushed conversation about the rules we instinctively know, but often forget, when it comes to things that look like us, but aren't. It began in the late autumn, in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of Blackwood Creek. Not a grand, sprawling mansion, but a comfortable, slightly too quiet home, bought by a young couple, Elias and Sarah. They were city transplants, looking for a simpler life, a place to start a family. The house itself was beautiful, full of character, high ceilings, intricate moldings, a sprawling, overgrown garden. But it also came with an attic, packed to the rafters with the previous owner's forgotten things. And among those things, tucked away in a cedar chest, was a doll. She wasn't particularly old or ornate, just a porcelain doll, maybe 20 inches tall, dressed in a faded blue gingham dress. Her hair was a tangle of synthetic blonde, and her eyes, painted a startlingly vivid blue, seemed a little too wide. Elias found her first, pulling her out with a half-joking shudder. Sarah, ever the sentimentalist, cleaned her up, said she felt sorry for her, trapped in the dark for so long. She placed her on a high shelf in the guest bedroom, a harmless decoration. That's where the whispers began. It started subtly, a feeling of being watched, even when alone in the house. Sarah would find herself pausing, her head tilted, convinced she'd heard a faint click or rustle from the guest room. Elias dismissed it as the house settling or her imagination. Then came the movement. One morning, Sarah walked past the guest room and swore the doll's head was angled differently than she'd left it, facing the doorway. The next day, it seemed to be turned towards the window, always subtly, never so drastically that she could be certain, just enough to plant a seed of doubt. She told Elias. He laughed gently. "The house is getting to you, babe. Maybe we should get a dog." But even as he joked, he found himself glancing at that guest room door a little longer when he walked by. The real shift happened the night Elias was working late. Sarah was downstairs reading when she heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. She froze. The house was supposed to be empty except for her. She called out, "Elias, is that you?" No answer. She grabbed the closest thing she could, a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, and crept upstairs. The guest room door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open slowly. The doll was on the floor, right in front of the shelf where it had been placed. Her heart hammered. It hadn't fallen. It was too far from the edge. It looked like it had been placed there, like it was waiting. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there, the iron poker feeling suddenly useless in her hand. The doll, lying face up on the dusty rug, seemed to stare directly at her. Its painted blue eyes, so wide, so vacant, felt impossibly deep. She felt a cold wave wash over her, a distinct impression of malevolence. Not just a thing that had moved, but a thing that wanted something. A dark, quiet hunger that seemed to emanate from its very core. She knelt, slowly, cautiously, and picked it up. Its porcelain felt unnaturally cold, even in the autumn chill of the room. As her fingers brushed its synthetic hair, she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. It wasn't a word, not exactly. More like a breath, a sigh. And it felt like it came from inside the doll. That night, Elias came home to find Sarah sitting bolt upright in bed, eyes wide, clutching a crucifix she hadn't worn in years. She told him everything, her voice a strained whisper. The thud, the doll on the floor, the cold, the whisper. He tried to reassure her, but her fear was palpable. He went into the guest room, picked up the doll, and, without a word, carried it outside. He threw it into the old, unused well in the backyard. The splash echoed in the night, too loud, too final. For a moment, they both felt relief, a lightness. It was gone. But then, as they stood there in the dark, a faint, almost inaudible giggle drifted from the well, high-pitched, childlike, and undeniably, horribly real. Have you ever felt absolute dread? That sickening realization that you've only made things worse? Here's what we know so far. A couple moved into an old Victorian home. They found a doll in the attic. The doll moved, and when they tried to get rid of it, something giggled from the dark. But the story doesn't end there, because the question that haunts me most isn't what happened in that house. It's why this same story has been told in different houses with different names for hundreds of years. Why do haunted doll stories all follow the same pattern? The discovery in an old place, the subtle movement, the cold to the touch, the sound in the dark, and most disturbingly, the feeling that it wanted something. What is it that our minds are recognizing deep in our primal architecture when we look at a doll and feel that ancient chill? Psychologists call it the uncanny valley, the discomfort we feel when something looks almost human, but not quite. Dolls sit right on that unsettling edge. They are crafted in our likeness, designed to be companions, but they are hollow, empty. Their eyes don't track, their expressions don't change, and yet some part of our brain keeps scanning them, waiting for the recognition that never comes.
And when that recognition fails, repeatedly, that gap gets filled with something else. Dread. Our ancient storytelling instinct kicks in, reaching back across millennia to the first time a human being carved a figure in their own image and wondered, quietly, if something might move in. Because that is the oldest magic, isn't it? The voodoo doll, the effigy, the clay figure, the corn husk doll left at a crossroads. Every culture, every continent, every century has its version of this. The small figure that becomes a vessel. The empty thing that becomes a home for something that has no other door. And so we come back to Sarah and Elias, standing in the dark beside that well, listening to a giggle that had no business existing. Because the doll was gone, yes, but the invitation remained. And whatever had moved in didn't need the porcelain anymore. It had already found something better. The question is never really about the doll. It's about what the doll unlocked. They moved out a month later, didn't even try to sell the house, just left it. The weight of that giggle, that profound sense of something unseen and unleashed, was too much to bear. They never spoke of it again, not directly, but Sarah refused to have dolls in their new home, any doll. And Elias would sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, convinced he could still hear that faint, distant splash, followed by something else, something scratching. What did they conclude? That some objects aren't just objects, they're anchors, or maybe they're invitations. Invitations for something to reside within, something drawn to our fascination, our belief, our willingness to project life onto the inanimate. The doll in Blackwood Creek wasn't unique, it was just one of countless stories. And that's what still doesn't feel right, that unsettling similarity. Why do so many people across time and cultures tell the same story about an object that looks like us, moves when we're not looking, and whispers from the dark? It echoes that very first question, doesn't it? What if that feeling of something looking back isn't just your imagination? What if it's the recognition of a very real, very ancient truth? That when we create things in our image, sometimes something else decides to move in. And there's one more thing, one detail that still keeps me awake at night when I think about Blackwood Creek. The previous owners of that house, the ones who left the doll behind in the cedar chest in the attic, they were found eventually. A couple in their 60s, living quietly in a retirement flat in another county. When they were asked about the doll, the woman went pale. She said they hadn't left any doll behind, said they'd never owned one, said they'd had that attic swept professionally before they moved out, specifically because they didn't want to leave anything. So whose doll was it? Where did it come from? And more importantly, where does it go next? So, tell me, have you ever owned a doll that gave you an odd feeling? A sense that it wasn't quite empty? Or maybe you've encountered an object, any object, that seemed to hold something inside it that had no right to be there? Share your experiences in the comments below. I want to know. If you made it this far, thank you. Hit that subscribe button for more late-night tales that linger long after the screen goes dark. Sweet dreams.